Recording.
Okay, welcome to Louisiana Master Naturalists of Greater Baton Rouge Nature Notes. It's Wednesday, April 21st. Tonight we have Gary Salath, who is a member of the Greater New Orleans Iris Society and the Society for Louisiana Irises, and founder and member of the Louisiana Iris Conservation Initiative. Since 2017, the Louisiana Conservation Iris Initiative has been dealing with irises that have been on the verge of being destroyed. The group has rescued over 30,000 irises and organized plantings throughout the state. And we are delighted to have him with us tonight to tell us all about it. And also to thank you, Gary, for rescuing these irises, because I've happened to see some of them and they're breathtaking. So welcome.
All right, good, thank you. You'd asked me to begin by explaining how I got involved in irises, and like most people, is through my family history. My mother used to have irises growing in a yard. In the New Orleans area, irises were always part of the culture, all back through time. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine sent me a newspaper article from the Times-Picayune in the 1930s, and there were huge groups that were planting irises at schools and city parks. So all through the 30s and 40s, especially, there were iris groups, and it was a big deal in New Orleans. Also, when you went just outside of town, or even in the city limits in some cases, before there was a lot of development, you could see irises everywhere. So my mother used to take us out as kids for trips on a weekend, little side trips. And so during the iris bloom, she had taken us to places where there'd be irises blooming in the wild. My wife and I downsized and bought a lot to build a garden home on 7 years ago, and there's a pond next to the house. And so I got a deal with a developer that I could landscape that pond. And so I remembered the irises that my mother grew and she used to show me. And so I decided to find some irises to put on the pond, and that got me connected with the Greater New Orleans Iris Society. They donated some irises to me and got me started. And 2 years later, my pond, they invited me to have the pond on the tour for American Iris Society.
Wow.
National Convention, which was a big success. And had quite a few thousand irises growing there. So like all things, it starts with a phone call to learn about a group. And within 3 years, I was on the board of directors. And that's kind of what got me started in this. And so if you're ready, I'll get started with my presentation, or if you have any questions on that.
Throughout the talk, Gary, if we have questions, do you want people to wait till the end, or you want to just answer them as they pop up? We can look at the chat for you.
Okay, why don't you do that? And if I'm moving past the topic, then let's stop. But it'd probably be better if we just keep rolling, because I got a lot of information. I know everybody's got questions about irises.
All right, we'll wait till the end. Sounds great.
Okay, you ready? All right, so I am with the Louisiana Iris Conservation Initiative. And this video is kind of going to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about.
Gary, she said your video is silent. You need to share the sound.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, I
Oh,
don't
you
think,
can't hear it. Okay.
no, Dad, whenever you share your screen, you might have to unshare and share again. There's a little button on the bottom of that box that actually says share computer sound.
Stop sharing it and then reshare it.
I'm sorry, y'all.
I'm
So then
sorry
when-
too. So
No,
what do I
you-
do now?
You share screen, and then there's going to be a little box at the bottom that says share computer sound.
Share.
Okay.
And then now share it.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm not going to start it over. I'll just start it from here.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so in that video, it kind of hits a lot of the points that we'll be talking about with what my group does. And so first of all, it starts off with irises that are threatened with destruction. There was road work being done on Lake Road in the Big Branch Refuge. And so you can see the irises are about to be dug up out of road equipment. So we work with the manager to get a permit to remove those irises. And most of what we're doing involves interagencies. So even though it's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service project, the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries offered us a pond at their fish hatchery in Lacombe to plant the irises that we rescued. And then everything that we do has to do with bringing the irises to the public. This is the Big Branch Refuge Boardwalk. About a quarter mile from here is one of the biggest stands of I-Gigantorial irises in southeast Louisiana, but there were none by the boardwalk. So when people go to the boardwalk, when they hit the trail that has the irises, they turn left and go back to the parking lot and never get to see the irises. And I've met people there from really all over the world. So, it's just kind of a shame that there were no irises growing along the boardwalk. The story also includes volunteers. Everything we do requires volunteers, and we've had a lot of success in getting young volunteers from around the country to help us. And so this is the payoff.
If you're feeling a little closed in these days, we found a nice spot where you and the family can spend an hour or two walking at a safe social distance from other people.
Dave McNamara takes us to the Big Branch National Wildlife Refuge in the heart of Louisiana.
This nature walk is tucked away along the southern edge of St. Tammany Parish, near where Bayou Lacombe meets Lake Pontchartrain. Mornings here are beautiful. It's called the Boy Scout Road Trail. A half-mile-long boardwalk takes you through a pine savanna and then leads you across a lowland marsh. Along the way, you are treated to a blooming landscape. Some obvious, and some of it requires a closer look. John and Leslie Wallace live nearby.
It's wonderful. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's some wildlife. We see deer and lots of birds, and enjoyed a lot.
Vegetation,
Vegetation,
beautiful
yeah.
vegetation.
The irises are beautiful.
If you don't have much of a garden at home, it doesn't get much better than this. All of the Louisiana irises are in bloom now, and they're right along the boardwalk. But the blooming...
So it'll be our little secret tonight. What they did not know was those irises that were along the boardwalk were planted by this group in the first video that I had showed you. So there's 5 Louisiana iris species: I. nelsoni, I. giganteurilla, I. bravocalis, I. hexagona, and I. fulva. These are the wild native irises. 4 of these have grown in Louisiana and still do. The 5th one, I. hexagona, at some point they thought it grew in the North Shore parishes on the eastern edge, but there's some debate as to whether or not it ever grew in Louisiana. But they are the species of Louisiana iris. So what has happened is about 100 years ago, people began to cross-pollinate the species, the 5 species irises, and that's what gives us the cultivars. And then they cross-pollinated the cultivars. New Orleans area, and actually South Louisiana, is known for the number of hybridizers that are working even now. And this is Joe, who's cross-pollinating some of the cultivars. So what they do is they'll cross-pollinate these irises and wait a year, they bloom. And if that bloom is no different, if that bloom is different than any other iris that's come before, then they can register that iris. Before they can register it, it has to go through the seedling phase, which shows that it can grow in someone's garden. The American Iris Society will not register an iris unless it's proven that it will grow in people's gardens. They don't want a beautiful iris that's difficult to grow. So you register the iris with the American Iris Society, and you can name that iris, and then that iris belongs to you. So you can imagine after 100 years, there's hundreds of registered cultivars. These are the irises that we buy from nurseries and plant in the garden. What's developed over the years is people will actually start a collection with the named irises and put labels in their garden to keep track of which irises they have. Just like coins, there's some cultivars that were created 50 or 60 years ago. Most people just collect them for the beauty, and they want to keep track of what the name of the iris is. So I'm going to do a quick iris lesson. Everybody always asks me these questions. And so what are the best conditions for growing Louisiana irises? They are a swamp plant. They like really rich soil with plenty of humus. They like water for the most part. This is typical of a garden bed that we do, which is a raised bed. If you have a clay soil that water will not pass through, instead of doing a raised bed, what you do is you dig down and then backfill that hole with good garden soil, and in effect you will have created a little miniature swamp. If your soil allows water to pass through, you can buy these mortar containers from Lowe's or Home Depot and bury it so that the lip is flush with the ground. Fill it with good garden soil, put the irises in and fill it with water, cover it with pine straw, and nobody will know it's in your garden. What's good about this method and this method is that you only have to water it once a week. You soak it. If you have a raised garden bed, you do have to work at keeping irises wet. Fertilizer is where a lot of people, when they complain they don't get blooms in the spring, one of the reasons is they're not fertilized. And the reason is the irises are fertilized during the time of year that most people aren't thinking about using a fertilizer. The irises grow from September through May. And this is a good schedule for fertilizing your irises: October, mid-January, or mid-February. Another reason why irises will not bloom is they will grow really well in deep shade. They'll look really great, but they won't bloom, or they'll bloom very little. Irises actually like direct sunlight. The optimum is 5 hours per day. You can get less hours, but then you'll get less blooms. If you have trees that lose their leaves during the wintertime, then you're good because they grow during the wintertime. So these 5 hours a day is while they're growing during the wintertime. So you have rich soil, regular watering, fertilizer, direct sunlight, and what that equals is weeds. Well, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but irises do need a lot of attention, and where a lot of people fall down and growing irises in their garden, it's just trying to keep track of the weeds and keep up with the weeds. This is also so true if you plant them along the bank of a pond. Now, some people have come up with a way to deal with that. This is a couple that I know in Madisonville. This is the ditch in front of their house, and that's the irises blooming in April. What he'll do is every July, he'll cut them back to a nub and do that all summer long. Takes care of any weeding. Then he'll stop weeding towards October when the weeds really aren't in a growth mode and start the cycle all over again. The irises reappear, they grow, they bloom, and then he gets right back to where he started from. So if you're interested in purchasing Louisiana irises, the Great New Orleans Iris Society has an April potted iris sale where the irises are sold in pots. There's usually 3 rhizomes in each pot, and they sell for $10 each. And they have an October rhizome sale where they sell just a single plant for $5. Everything's labeled so you can see exactly what the name of the iris is and what color it is. Both these sales took place this year, but they took place after the first of the year. They were kind of out of sync with the times they usually do it, but our plan is to get back on track in October with the rhizome sale. If you're interested in the Greater New Orleans Iris Society, their main focus is on cultivars and growing and collecting cultivars. If you'd like to purchase irises online, this is the name of some of the irises that I can recommend, iris nurseries that I can recommend. Cindy's is not too far from New Orleans in Mississippi. And so what happens is you get on the website, select your iris, send the order form in with some money, and they will ship them to you in August. The best time to August and September. The best time to plant irises is in September. Now, the Great New Orleans Iris Society also is a steward in the Society for Louisiana Irises, which is a national iris group based in Louisiana. And so what the Society for Louisiana Irises has done, they have set up a Louisiana Iris Species Preservation Project. And so these are species irises, those 5, that over the years, people have found color variations. For instance, this is the red Nelsoni, and for some reason, the red gene got turned off and it came out yellow. So what they want to do is preserve those unique species that people have collected from the wild, I mean, really for the last 50 or 60 years. And so the Greater New Orleans Iris Society has a nursery in City Park where they propagate irises. And so they are a steward for this program, and they have the full collection. And those are all species irises in that collection. So going back to our 5 species, the 2 that my group is mostly dealing with is, I'm sorry? The 2 that my group are mostly dealing with are I. giganteurilla and I. fulva. I'm going to give you a quick description of each species. Iris brevicellus. You'll find this up around Baton Rouge. It's also known as the zigzag iris because of the zigzag stem. And it's a short iris, and it doesn't like standing in water. It actually likes areas that will get wet, but also dry, has dry periods. And you can see from the map below that it extends all the way up to Canada. The I. hexagona is also known as the Dixie iris. It's very rare in the wild, and even though you'll see plenty of websites that shows grows in Louisiana, there's no known stands that we're aware of. And even in the states that have this iris, you can see on the map, there's just a few counties in yellow where they grow wild, where they still can be found. The Abbeville red is the Inosoni, is the rarest iris in the world. It only grows on a 1,200 acre privately owned swamp near Abbeville. And some of those have been transplanted with permission of the owners to the state park near Abbeville, Palmetto State Park. And so they're trying to recreate the habitat. So just in case something happens to the Abbeville swamp, there'll be a group of these irises growing within that state park where they protect them. The copper iris, you see this quite a bit around Baton Rouge and west of Baton Rouge. It also kind of likes being along the bank of a stream or a bayou, not necessarily in standing water all the time. You'll see it quite often in ditches with the spider lily. The giant blue is Gigantorilla. That's the one that's most prominent in southeast Louisiana. It's the one that we're mostly working with. And it likes it wet. Wet and very mucky, rich soil is what it does well in. So Percy Viasco was one of the first naturalists in Louisiana. And he was very interested in irises, and he developed this map in 1935. And it's actually a pretty good map for seeing these zones that the different irises grow in. And you'll see the Gigantorilla in blue grows along the coastal areas. The fulva is more upland and along bayous and the river. The brevicalis is up here in yellow. That's the highland iris. The green is the eye virginica, which I'll talk about in a minute. That is not a Louisiana iris. So the eye virginica is an iris. It's just not a Louisiana iris, and it's very prevalent on the North Shore and goes all the way up into Canada. So, and they in bloom right now in a lot of areas in southeast and central Louisiana. So the question always comes up, well, how do I know if an iris I see, or if I'm thinking about buying an iris, is a Louisiana iris? And we have what's called the rib test. And you can see this rib that goes down the center of the leaf, and you can feel that rib, or you can hold it up to the sunlight and you'll see the rib. If it has the rib, it is not a Louisiana iris. None of the Louisiana iris species or cultivars have that rib. So one of the most prevalent irises that are not Louisiana irises or not native to our area and are considered an invasive species is the yellow flag iris. This is iris that you'll see in Home Depot, Lowe's, a lot of nurseries. You'll see it in almost all the ditches. They clog the ditches. And so, you know, we've always said, well, it's an iris, it's a big deal. Well, the problem is we're starting to see it show up in the wild. This is a patch that we found at the Lockport boardwalk. I mean, it was way out in the swamp. How it got there, or how the seeds even got there, we don't have a clue. But the problem is this picture was sent in by one of the people following our Facebook page, is that's the Gigantorilla irises, and those are the yellow flags. So what we said was, if you come back and look at this picture right here, which was taken 2 weeks ago, next year, you'll see 2 or 3 times the number of yellow and maybe half the number of blues. And if you come back in 3 years, there'll be no blues and it'll all be yellows. It's becoming a real problem. So I encourage anybody that has these irises, I mean, keep them in your garden, that's fine, but please don't dig them up and throw them in the ditch or throw them out in the wild. The 2 irises that my group is mostly interested in are I. Gigantorilla and I. fulva. So if you go back, 100 years ago, which would be the early part of the 1900s, irises were everywhere in South Louisiana and Southeast Louisiana. They were so prevalent that when this picture was taken, these 2 guys weren't even looking at them, they were looking the other way. Literally every ditch, every marsh, every swamp had you'd find irises growing in them. So the reason Louisiana irises have declined primarily is these 3. Development, obviously filling in the swamps, herbicides. What's happened is over the last 20 years or so, many of the parishes, or actually all of the parishes in Louisiana, has started spraying a herbicide in the roadside ditches and saltwater intrusion. So development can be large scale, like this is a new levee that's been approved and is about to be under construction by Laplace. It's called the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain Levee. That's it in red. So all this area in green, which is currently a cypress swamp, is going to be shut off from tidal flow in Lake Pontchartrain. So it's going to totally change that habitat. This is a view of the work that they've done so far on the levee. Obviously, that work alone probably killed thousands of irises. The second thing is actual development. This is a piece of property that we're working with the landowner to get these irises out, the green irises, as he fills in for a parking lot. This is technically not a swamp, so he is perfectly within his rights to cover up all irises. They are not on any type of endangered species list, so they're not protected at all. Other developments are simply homeowners that have them on their property whose plans have changed. This site is no longer here. It's been totally bulldozed. We did go in and probably took out 2,000 irises. This is a sad picture. These are actually irises blooming that we saw the landowner felling. I mean, he couldn't even wait till after they were done blooming. So the herbicides, the issue there is if you're in South Louisiana and you have ditches holding water or can't have water run off, then you'll have water on the road. Or if weeds and bushes are causing the ditches not to drain, it'll eventually soak into the road base. In the past, this was all cut with tractors, and if you go far enough back in time, probably by hand. But because of the economy of scale and the fact that many of the parishes are struggling with budget issues, herbicide is what's typically used now. So where all these ditches may have held irises 50 years ago, they're not holding any irises now. About 3 weeks ago, I took a trip all through the Morgan City area looking for wild irises. And Highway 20 goes right through this huge wetlands area. And I saw more of the yellow flag irises than I saw the I. giganteurilla that I was expecting to see. And what's really interesting about this picture is in the distance, you can see everybody keeps that ditch well mowed. This homeowner doesn't. And because of that, there's this long stretch of I. giganteurilla irises that were blooming. So this is like a sneak preview of what you would have seen 50 or 60 years ago for miles on many of the state roads and highways in Southeast Louisiana. What's interesting about this particular story here is the guy whose pickup truck was in the driveway works for the maintenance department of the parish. So it may be, and I suspect it's the case, that he's deliberately not cutting the grass in his ditch so that he can enjoy the irises every year in his little effort to preserve them. But this is also shows you the problem. To have irises along the side of a road, you need to let the ditches get overgrown, which ain't going to happen for the reasons I said. Saltwater intrusion, we all know about that. Land subsidence, all kinds of canals, other reasons. When hurricanes come in, the saltwater tidal surge comes in with it. That's probably the biggest thing that's had an effect on the number of irises in healthy wetlands. So we're all aware of the vanishing coastline, and the wild irises are vanishing with it. Excuse me, but something happened a few years ago. It was called the Mardi Gras. It's called the Mardi Gras Pass. It's still there. And this is a natural opening in the levee along the Mississippi River in southern Plaquemine Parish, the natural levee. It broke through, and it's an area that all this area is an area I used to fish in, and that's the Mardi Gras Pass over here. It doesn't look very impressive, but you can see the silt that it's putting out. And the reason I have trouble here with this arrow is I've passed through this area many times with my boat, and I hadn't for about 3 years. And so a buddy of mine and I went fishing So I went roaring through there like I always did, and got bottomed out and realized when I jumped overboard to push, I don't know why we got bottomed out. The water was only 6 inches deep. And when I jumped out, instead of jumping out onto muck, I jumped out on firm ground. It was almost as if I was on a parking lot. And it was river sand, compacted river sand. So the Mardi Gras passes had a tremendous impact on about 3 or 4 square miles, converting it from salt water to fresh water, but it's also building land. Another thing is my business partner and I have been invited numerous times to rabbit hunt in the area right here. So we've seen over the years this delta being created. Oh, so that's the Wax Lake Outlet Delta. This is the Afchala River Delta. This is new land that's being created by silt from the Mississippi River going through the Afchala Basin. The Pontchartrain Conservancy salinity map they put out every month, because we've been in a wet period the last few years, including the spillway being open twice last year. Lake Pontchartrain has gone pretty much to being all freshwater. I mean, it's subject to change, but in January, when you would expect this to be mostly freshwater, that's 1 part per thousand. The 8 part per thousand, which is still not pure salt water, is way out here. But what's different is in August of 2020, the 1 part per thousand line had not moved that much, and the 8 part per thousand line just moved in a little bit. So if you've heard about all the planting that's being done with cypress trees, especially in the Manchac Bridge, by different groups, is because of this change of Lake Pontchartrain since the Mr. Go was closed, from going to mostly salt water to being mostly fresh water. The Mr. Go is down here, and once that was closed off, believe it or not, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge here at Bayou Lacombe does water tests. They noticed the salinity in the lake dropping the very next year, and it's dropped every year for a period of time until it got to where we are now. So you wouldn't think that one dam way down here would have that impact, but it did. So that's opened up all kinds of opportunities for freshwater plants to be reintroduced. So you may be aware, I'm sure you are, that the fight is on. I mean, with the BP penalty money and other funds that are available, the state now has a plan to fight the coastal erosion that we've experienced in the subsidence, mostly with Mississippi River diversions. And they also do marsh restoration using dredges and pumping in soil. So this plan's in effect, and you may have heard about some of the most recent projects that are coming up for final approval of begin construction, and it's going to have a pretty big impact. But people don't realize that some of these projects have already been done on a small scale and have begun to add land to Louisiana. The most recent test collection of test data by the government, the U.S. government, shows that Louisiana actually gained land, and that's going to be confirmed when they release those results in about 9 months. So it's not something that's being discussed very much in the news media, but it's really exciting news. So there's also wetlands permit mitigation. So if you own a piece of property that's considered a wetlands, but it's a high value property that could be developed, in some cases, the Corps engineer will allow you to buy land somewhere else or go into land that someone owns that has it set up as a mitigation. And then you go in there and improve it to make up for the land that's being destroyed somewhere else. So there's plenty of opportunity for freshwater plants like ours to be used there. So it's like, okay, great. All these new opportunities are coming up to help get the Louisiana Iris back in the game again. But then we found out that the manager of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Bayou Sauvage Refuge did a project. They took soil from the bottom of Lake Bourne, pumped it into these 3 areas and created new land. So when she went to order the plants to replant it, she's a big Louisiana Iris fan. She told us that irises weren't even on the list of plants that she could purchase. So I knew the slot's kind of hokey. These two ladies look like they're laughing that they're even in it. But we want to believe that all things in the wild, there's somebody with lab coats on studying them. Somebody's watching out for all the different animals and plants. And so we like to think that maybe somebody's interested in the iris enough, some governmental agency that's keeping an eye on it. Somewhere, somebody's watching out for. But the reality is it's not. Sexy animals like the black bear, whales, they do have people in lab coats running around studying them and trying to reintroduce them. But for the most part, there's so many things that are being impacted in a negative way right now that nobody's really doing anything about it. And so we realize that the reality is it has to be a citizens-driven effort if something's going to be done to help bring the Louisiana Iris back. So when the Great New Orleans Iris Society, we asked ourselves, what can we do? Because there was a group of us that were interested in preserving the wild irises. So the first thing we said, we're going to take a proactive approach. We're going to get out there and try to make something happen. And so these are the things that we thought we could do. First of all, increase awareness with the public and the managers of the marsh and swamps, because you'd be amazed at how many managers of wildlife refuges didn't even know they had Louisiana irises or even what they were, not to mention that they threaten in any way. So what we came up with, the way to get the public interested, is to use the boardwalks that are all over in these different refuges where people can go out and safely see Louisiana irises in their natural habitat. We're going to enhance the number of irises at the boardwalks, and we're going to market the boardwalks to get people to go out and see them when they're blooming, to try to get the Louisiana iris back in the consciousness of the public as it was 50 or 60 years ago, like with my mother and all her friends. So what we're going to do is use the boardwalks as a way for people to safely see Louisiana irises in their natural habitat as compared to putting them in parks. That's not their natural habitat. So these are two of the projects that we've done. Other boardwalks in these areas. There's one in Baton Rouge. I forget the name of it. It's the Black Swamp. I'm sure you guys are aware of it. The Woodlands Conservancy, the Mandalay Wildlife Refuge near Houma. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to find irises that are threatened and move them to where the people are going to see swamps and marshes in Louisiana irises. So we're going to enhance the number of irises that are there if they have some, or we're going to add them for the first time if they don't have any. So a good example is Joe Bachman, which I'm sure you guys know. He was one of the founders of the Master Naturalists in Louisiana. He lived in Jean Lafitte, and he and three guys built a mile-long boardwalk in the town of Jean Lafitte. And so Joe was ahead of us. I guess you could say we're following in his footsteps, in that he recognized the need for the public to safely get out in the swamp, because if the public doesn't have an airboat, pirogues, or boats to see a swamp, how do you get people to understand that they need to be preserved and what the wildlife and the plant life is that's in them? So he was one of the forerunners of the idea of building these boardwalks, to the point that he actually went out and built one with the support of the city and brought irises in to add that to the mix so that people could learn about the Louisiana iris. So at Jean Lafitte Boardwalk on December 7th, 2019, we actually did a iris planting on his behalf at the boardwalk to enhance the number of irises there. And his widow, City Bachman, came out and gave us a hand. And the mayor, the current mayor, came out and helped, and his son helped too. He's now, I think, a representative for the state of Louisiana, and the son is now the mayor. And they're big supporters of the boardwalk and trying to increase the number of irises that are out there. Interesting story here is we invited Cindy to come out and give us a talk about Joe before we started work, which she did. We had opening remarks. And so when we were finished, I said, well, Cindy, if you want to just kind of stay by the base station, you're welcome to stay. And she said, shoot with that. I brought my boots. So that's her up to her knees in muck, planting irises at the boardwalk that her husband built. So the way to market the boardwalks is, of course, social media, which we relied on heavily this year, but also we've made brochures that we've given to the tourists, Louisiana Tourist Commission, visitor centers, and sent out to various groups. We've done open houses. This is one that we did at the North Lake Nature Center. Invite the public out to see the irises because, you know, it's great for the public to come out and see irises, but if they don't know what they're looking at and nobody can answer any questions for them, then we only partially accomplishing our goal. The Louisiana species iris is available in significant numbers as an improved plant for future and public-private marsh restoration. So we want to try to find a way to propagate enough irises so that they will be included on the list of plants available to people that are doing restoration or mitigation projects. Right now, if you need 40,000 irises for a project, you can't get them. They don't exist at those kind of numbers. So for our purposes, with the projects that we're doing, we came up with some ideas on how we can get the irises that we need. We talked to Liberty Storage by Madisonville. In St. Tammany Parish, like a lot of other parishes, commercial properties have detention ponds. And so they're allowing us to grow some of these irises in their ponds. So this is a way for irises to be grown. It does require maintenance, but somebody else is doing the maintenance. The University Medical Center has one of the biggest stands of Louisiana irises in their gardens because they wanted everything to be all native plants. Somebody screwed up, these are all yellow flag. And when they found that out, they are interested in having all those dug up and replaced with plants. So these would be areas that could be propagating irises for our projects where somebody else owns the land and somebody else is taking care of them. The other maintenance options that we have to take care of irises is the Great New Orleans Iris Society has their nursery in City Park. We can actually grow them there if we have the volunteers to maintain them. And places like the Sculpture Garden in City Park have huge stands of irises, but they do need to be maintained. The Great New Orleans Iris Society has just begun a program of using seeds from wild irises to propagate them and actually grow irises that way. One of the big things that we're working on is with Nicholls State University and the USDA is to come up with irises being grown in big enough numbers and to study them and improve them as the real species irises get on the approved list so that the USDA can get those irises out to their approved nurseries for restoration projects. So we are working with Nicholls State. We hope to bring in quite a few thousand this year. Nicholls State will start growing them, confirm what they are, and then at some point, the USDA will approve them to go to these nurseries. Another thing that we've done with that involves maintenance is to have them grown by individuals. We have a number of individuals like this couple in Mandeville. They dug these irises up from the swamp years ago, and they're doing what irises do. They're taking over their yard. So we come and thin out about 400 or 500 every year. This is the Beatico Creek subdivision outside of Madisonville. We have them growing along their ponds. These are places where we do what we call parking irises, where when we don't have a place to bring the irises, by the boardwalks. We find, but they need to be rescued. We find places where we can just stick them in the ground and leave them, and then knowing that they're available to us in the future to come back and either dig up completely or to thin out. Most of the time, we just want to thin them out. St. Tammany Parish has huge numbers of these dry detention ponds that hold water when it's raining. And then they come through and they bush hog them twice a year. So they keep these from becoming overgrown with bushes and trees. So these are like a giant version of my friend who's cutting the irises in the ditch. It's a way for the irises to stay long-term on a piece of property and not be overcrowded by trees or bushes. This is the wet detention pond. This is that one in Beatco Creek. The job of this pond is to actually detain rainwater. And it's a spot where the people in the subdivision go to fish and have picnics and things. And so we have quite a few irises growing there, and we've thinned out probably a couple thousand from what we planted. One of the negatives that we learned from these type of areas is people fall in love with the irises. So when we come back to thin them out, they're not always real happy about it. And then some of the projects we're doing, I guess you could say, are propagating. In Bayou Sauvage Wildlife Refuge, we have thousands of irises grown by the viewing platform. And the reason they're all there is once they fill that area up, we're going to thin them out and move them to other areas in the refuge. Same thing with the North Lake Nature Center. Without maintenance, we've had people like Chef John Foles, the Grow Death Youth Farm in City Park, the USDA Research Center, some of the employees have put in rain gardens. So we're always looking for opportunities to find places where we can put these irises where they increase and we can come thin them out in future years. In case we have a year where there are no irises to be rescued. John Chef Foltz is all things all Louisiana. He actually built a pond so that we could put the rescued irises in. And he thinks it's the coolest thing in the world that he was actually growing irises for restoration projects at his facility. Another place that we've done this is St. Joseph Abbey. The monks there approached us. They would like to grow irises that they know will go back in the marsh. So we have a few thousand growing there. I went and saw them 2 weeks ago with one of their representatives to check on them. They're doing great. St. Tammany's Children's Museum has a pond that they use for educational purposes, and we put in 1,000 rescued irises there that are being grown. So where do we get the irises from to put in all these places? And for the most part, it's iris rescue. That's how we get most of them. In some cases, it's donations, like this couple I was telling you about. In Madisonville, we have a number of homeowners, one in Houma that has a big pond that welcome us to come thin their irises to use in projects. I have to say, it doesn't always work, because if there's other irises around that may be cross-pollinating with these, or if just one cultivar shows up in this clump, then they really have no use to us, because we do not want to plant cultivars out in the wild. So we do have to see them bloom every year before we'll go in and use them. This is a guy outside of Madisonville. He dug these up from the swamp, but he only had maybe 100 plants or less. And over the years have now grown to the point where he's got 10,000 of them. And he's been allowing us to thin them out. Another homeowner, this one clump, we took some of those, and with his permission, we put them in the ditch on the back of his property. We've gotten probably 1,500 irises from this guy's yard over the last 3 or 4 years. This is Mr. Murphy. He took some white gigantorrhea irises from the swamp years ago, built a special container to grow them in. He's giving them away to all his family, and he's keeps us supplied with these. So the reason we have to go in and thin them out is that each rhizome of an iris put out 2 offshoots every year, at least 2. If they're really happy, and this is a really happy gigantorrhea iris, So that was one offshoot. And from that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think I counted it was like 12 to 15 offshoots. Each one of these offshoots can be, each one of these offshoots can be broken off and they'll create a new plant. Next year, that plant will put out 2. In this case, maybe we'll put out 5. So doing the math, you'll see how quickly, this is eye gigantorrhea, how quickly they'll expand, and how by getting all these rescued irises out in these different places, it's going to give us the source of irises for many years. The main way we rescue irises is we find sites like this one I showed you before, where we get permission from the homeowner to dig them up and take them out before they're destroyed by development. So one thing with Iris Rescue that we discovered with the Great New Orleans Iris Society is we like a lot of garden clubs, and that we have older membership. And so we got out there heave too. This was a really terrible morning. It was probably 90 degrees with 90% humidity. And we all of a sudden realized that the biggest limitation we had to really having a big impact was labor. We needed young labor and plenty of it. Well, one of the things we found out is that there are plenty young people that want to help save the environment. And in particular, once they understand it, love helping out saving the Louisiana Iris. We approached different groups around town, including the Louisiana Naturalists. I regularly have volunteers from the New Orleans chapter. And we discovered that there were volunteers that we could get locally. And then we found that there were groups that bring in college students from around the country to volunteer on restoration projects. And so we were able to get on these people's list to supply them with projects. Common Ground Relief particularly took an interest in what we were doing, and it got to the point where when they had a group come in from out of state for a week, they'd give us one day just to do our stuff. So with all the pieces in place, ours is available, labor available, places to put them available. We spent 2 years developing the program. And we were having a lot of success. In 2018, we planted 8,000 gigantorrhea irises, rescued and planted. In 2020, the first part of 2020, we got up to 13,000. Then COVID-19 hit. All the college students went home. Of course, you all know the story. All the open houses for April 2020 had to be canceled. But then a funny thing happened. My wife and I went out to the North Lake Nature Center to see the irises. This is when it was, we had to really stay apart, and a lot of people not being able to go to work. It was the worst of the crisis. We couldn't find a parking spot, and we started finding at all these boardwalks. People were dying to get outside and do something. Well, just do something, and you had to do it outside if you were going to do anything. So there were plenty of people out at the boardwalks looking at the irises bloom, and it was just unfortunate that we couldn't be there to tell them what it was that we were looking at. Then another funny thing happened. All these people that were out of work, or their work schedule was significantly reduced, were looking for something to do that they felt like they were accomplishing something. So even though we didn't have the college students, we developed a pretty good base of local volunteers that were helping us out in all age groups. Not as numerous as the college students, but enough to keep us going for the year. So that caused us to put into effect something we've been thinking about, and that was to break off from the Great New Orleans Iris Society, and so that we could just focus on this iris rescue and wild iris planting project. So that's when we formed the Louisiana Iris Conservation Initiative. We're not a club. We don't have members. I mean, really, I have a board of directors, and everybody else is just volunteers, and they come and go, and they volunteer whenever they want. We have no dues. all our money comes from donations. And our motto is we dig and plant. That's what we do. We don't meet. We don't have socials. Our social is all showing up with shovels and rescuing some irises. Then Common Ground Relief, we needed a place to put the irises if we were digging them up during the summer, strengthen them before we put them out in the wild, back in the wild. And Common Ground Relief had a piece of property in the Lower Ninth Ward that they allowed us to use. And so we got some donations from some of these three groups in particular to pay for all the equipment and the soil. That was all done by volunteers. It was a very low budget type of thing. And so we set it up, started rescuing irises with whoever volunteers we could get, plant them into the containers. And by the end of the summer, we had 8,000 irises growing. All of these were actually rescued. Well, all but maybe 300 or 400 were rescued irises, not donations. This was one of the largest volunteer groups we did. We used to do them all of size, but for the most part, because of restrictions on the COVID-19, we were trying to limit it to 8 or so volunteers at a time. We were able, this site was a very safe site to work and everybody could spread out. So we were able to get a pretty good size group. This was in Fontainebleau State Park, and this was done this past winter. These are the places that hook and crook and somehow managed to get the volunteers and get the irises and get them growing and digging them from our iris holding area in the Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood. These are all the places that we put irises in this past winter. We opened up new territories. We get involved with groups along Bayou Teche. The tech group that are trying to get native plants growing along the bayou instead of people using brick, concrete riprap along the bayou shoreline. We've met with the mayor in, I forget the town along Bayou Tech, and they are actually going to make a site for us to plant irises along the bayou in that city park. So we were able to get 8,000 irises in this year. And I'll tell you what, it really brought, luckily with April, things kind of started slacking with the COVID-19 lockdowns. It was very nice. We had a really great bloom that's just now finishing up. I made a walk through a couple of the boardwalks yesterday, and there's still a few irises blooming. And so we really are well on our way in accomplishing our goal, the first goal, which is to get the irises introduced to the public. Those are those irises that the Ohio State students planted in that first video. So this is a great picture. I mean, this is exactly what we're trying to do, is to raise awareness. And all the refuge managers told us they had more people that came out because of the social media things we did. And we were able to get some really nice articles written in newspapers and magazines. This is my favorite picture. Because, we always talk about the younger generation, TV, computers, and all that sort of thing. And one thing we noticed this spring is that there were a lot more young people and families out at the boardwalk. And this picture was taken by a lady, and that's her family, at the Bayou Teche refuge, which this boardwalk is really difficult to find. And she had problems finding it. It's very remote, outside of Morgan City, and she sent us a note just telling us how much they enjoy it. It's the first time they've ever been out in the swamp. They didn't know you could go walk on boardwalks. And I think of all the pictures I received this year, and I took, this is my favorite one because it really shows, or at least the hope that we all starting to make a difference and raise the awareness of Louisiana swamps and the iris in particular. So this was a picture taken in I can't read what it says, but it was 1995, I think, or 99. LaBranch wetlands. This is what I'm talking about when I say what you used to see 100 years ago all the time. This one 100 years ago, but it was one of the last stands of irises like this that anybody knew about. we don't think it's still there. This area has been impacted by one of the storm surges, the salt water a few years ago. But the thing that I tell people is it's really important to understand what, our motto is kind of what once was can happen again. But we don't mean it has to go back to where it was 100 years ago, because that's, that may not, probably isn't possible. But we're okay if it just means going back to where we were 25 years ago. So that's the end of my presentation. That's our website, which we keep current. We do a lot of stuff on Facebook. Our YouTube channel was mostly music videos like I did for the college students that volunteered. So since we didn't have the volunteers, we haven't been doing as many YouTube videos. If you'd be interested in volunteering on our projects, all age groups are welcome. Sometimes we need volunteers just to man the base station and make sure everybody has drinks and things like that if you're not physically able to get out and dig or plant irises. And that's our email address. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start trying to see if we can get some donations in. We do need to buy more containers and more garden soil. And like I said, none of us have paid anything. None of us have recouped our gasoline expense or anything. Every donation we get goes to buying tools, garden soil, and maintaining our iris holding area. That's it. I hope I haven't been on mute all this time.
No, this is fantastic. Sorry, some of us had to put some Kleenex down. Sorry, this is really sweet. It really, seriously, Gary, y'all are amazing. And we've got a couple questions. I think Catherine can read them off of chat. But as she's been talking,
Okay.
It's pop up, so we'll get some questions asked of you.
Okay.
Do
I'll
you
put a
see
better
Catherine?
picture up while we talk.
Yeah, yeah.
Hang on, I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay.
That's my favorite. That's my second favorite
Yeah.
picture.
Oh,
Okay,
they're all
so
good.
somebody said, I think I have one of 5 species. I think I have one of the 5 species of Louisiana irises, I. hexagonia, but it's possible maybe a cultivar. How can I tell if I have a hexagonia or a cultivar?
It is extremely difficult to tell in ours strictly by its photograph. You almost need some, if it's a hexagon, you almost need some kind of backstory about where it came from, the height of the plant. So I would encourage anybody, and that's the most difficult. As a matter of fact, at the Big Branch Refuge, there's a trail I was talking about that has a lot of irises on it. It's called the Boy Scout Road Trail. Very remote. Those irises have been there as long as anybody can remember, because the road's been there as long as anybody can remember. And one of the members of the Great New Orleans Iris Society thought that he found a small stand of hexagon. In the iris world, that'd be really big news. It'd be like Jurassic Park that showed that the iris did grow in Louisiana. So some of the iris experts with the Great New Orleans Iris Society ran up there and studied the plants, but they caught it right when the bloom was ending. And it was inconclusive. They weren't sure if it was maybe just some slightly different form in our gigantorial. My wife and I walked Boy Scout Trail Sunday, and I hit that clump. And again, I had to look at them and go, these are different. So I took a bunch of pictures. I've sent them to the experts again, the wise men. So the hexagon is tough. So without some type of backstory of, where it was found, what the habitat was, the size of the plant, and a lot of pictures, it'd be very difficult to determine. I would recommend Googling it and seeing the description of the plant and see how many boxes you can check that what you have matches.
So as the irises spread in the boardwalk habitats, do they crowd out other native plants?
The irises will. I mean, for the most part, yeah, I mean, all the plants are in competition with each other, and some plants, irises, can dominate a location. Things like cattails, cutgrass, it's no hands down win for them. I mean, they push out everything else. So yeah, when you go out in the swamp, everything's competing with everything else, and some win, some don't. Some it's known that one, like this area, this picture right here, if you notice there's a willow tree growing, it's just a bare trunk, it's a small willow tree. If you come back 10 years from now, that willow tree may be 15 inches in diameter and shaded out every one of these irises. So, you know, the habitat's always in the process of change, and at some periods of time, one plant may dominate and then it fades and another plant takes its place.
So someone else wanted to know if we know of places that would like irises planted. Do we contact you?
I would say send us an email. It all depends on what the inventory is, you know, the number of irises that we can rescue. But these are the things that we're looking for in the sites that we go to. Is it available to the public? Some areas like the Abbey are actually shut off from the public, but it's isolated, so we know they're not going to be cross-pollinated. And we actually just needed a place to put the irises because we had dug them up. But if it's available to the public, that's a really big plus, because that's helping achieve our goal, like these boardwalks are doing. It doesn't have to be a boardwalk. Second thing is, what are the risk factors for the site? You know, we had it happen this year in the Indian Reservation by Morgan City. We put the irises in, the head maintenance guy was told about it, he was all in on it, but nobody talked to the guy that was holding the Roundup sprayer, and he sprayed half of them. So the biggest risk that you have in areas like parks and things like that is it going to create a burden for the staff to maintain it because of the weeds? And so that's one of the things we look at. Can they grow naturally without anybody having to take care of them? Because if it's a public place and they have to take care of them, eventually they're going to get worn out. And the parks don't like it because it looks like they're not doing their job keeping the place up. So yeah, send us an email, the location, description, how we can get in contact with you, and we'll be more than happy to look at sites.
Okay, I hope I don't slaughter these pronunciations, but how does one differentiate Iris nelsoni from Iris fulva?
When you Google these irises, you'll see a lot of attention's being put into where they were found and the height of the plant. The I. nelsoni is a water plant, just like the I. gigantea. So it grows in water in the swamp. I mean, it'll grow out of water, but it prefers being in about 2 or 3 inches of water. The fulva doesn't. It'll take water like that for a while, but it needs some periods where it's not staying in water. The fulva is not as tall. It's going to be a shorter iris. The nelsoni can get up 3 feet tall. Now there's other things involving the petals that are very, very detailed, which you can find on the internet when you research it. I don't want to confuse it by bringing it up here. But once an iris is taken from its natural habitat and put in a garden or a plant, it's just really difficult to determine, you know, with definitive feelings that you know exactly what it is. Almost all the irises that we're getting from people, it's because we know the backstory. I mean, they can tell us where they got the irises from, how long they've been there, and the fact that they come up every year the same color every year. And then we go out and look at them, and by the height of the plant, the color, in the form of the flower, we can tell that they're the species. If somebody calls us and say we have irises, we have no idea where they came from, you know, we're a little wary because we really don't want to introduce cultivars into the wild.
I think that's about it. I think the other question was already answered. So you did have some wonderful comments about it, an amazing, well done presentation. So yeah, we really appreciate you being with us tonight.
Wow, I just looked at the time. I hope I didn't talk too long.
No, you talked, but you had great pictures. So that we enjoyed everything, Gary. And
Great.
I hopefully you can, I'll let folks know they can join the Facebook page.
Mhm.
But I'm sure there's some folks that'd be interested in joining you late, in the fall with some of your
Sure.
things. And then
Yep.
for your donations, is there something that you have on your website, like a PayPal or?
We are in the process of setting that up. So this is the
Okay.
first time I mentioned donations. So I'm
Okay.
a little ahead of the game, but I want to take the opportunity while I had y'all. But yeah, we're going to have a board meeting.
Well, keep
'Cause
us posted.
we actually won out. we had one guy travel 400 miles in one day taking
Oh.
pictures of ours.
Oh my.
We're taking a little bit of a break and then we're going to get geared up. And yeah, we'll be up and
Please let
running.
us know. Don't feel shy about sending stuff to us, or send it through Krista. She's on the board.
Okay.
She's on our board. So
Okay,
she can
good.
mention it to us. Yeah, she'll be your
Great.
liaison.
Yes,
Yep.
that's fine.
She hangs up
My
the purple
liaison
hearts
in
all the time.
life. And my IT person.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we help rescue Purple Martin, so we're good. We're good.
Oh, yeah.
We do. We
Great.
try to do it all.
Good. I'm real proud of her. She's an
Well,
inspiration to
She's
me.
been a
actually.
dynamo on our
Thank you, Dad.
on our outreach. Yeah, well, I see where Apple doesn't fall far. She's been a dynamo on our outreach, so we get
Great.
it. Seeing both of you all, we get it.
Okay, good.
But
All right, well, thanks again for inviting me to give the
thanks
talk.
so much, Gary. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye.
Good night, everybody.